There's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door. Open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
All right. Let the King of Glory in. Open up the door starts right now. So fling wide you heavenly gates and prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ. And he heard a sound behind him. He said, I looked. There was a door standing open in heaven, and I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. And that is what this broadcast is all about, discussing the issues of the day, discerning the times in which we live, from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good afternoon, everybody. Andy White here, and what you are about to hear is, of course, the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. So I want to welcome everybody from all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. I am streaming live today, both on my Facebook Live. If you're joining in, if you're tuning in, please let me know where you're watching from, where you're listening from. But I'm also streaming live on my YouTube page today, using both platforms today, kind of as an experiment. Want to broaden the horizons, broaden the outreach. So if you are on Facebook or viewing on YouTube, please share this to your streams and invite people to open up the doors. We are streaming on the internet, of course, at hamptonschristian.com. If you are outside of the Faith FM area, the best way to listen to Faith FM, Christian programming from the east end of Long Island, 24/7, would be to download the free Faith FM app. You can get the app at the Google Play Store for your Android platform, or the Apple Store for the App Store at Apple for your Apple platform, your iPhone, your iPad, whatnot. You know all these things by now if you're tech savvy. If you'd like to email me, you can email me at ajwhite777 at icloud.com. That's ajwhite777 at icloud.com. So, again, thanks for joining in, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Well, as always, I've got way more material than I've got time for. But let's get into the meat and potatoes of today. I got to set a little bit of a background, though, to let you know where this is going. You know, for the last, I don't know, I guess it's been 2.5, 3 months now, I've been saying, as those of you know who have been listening to me regularly, watching what I'm posting on Facebook, I've been saying that this coronavirus situation is the greatest mass societal manipulation in all of history. You've been had, folks. Manipulated and exploited, lied to and fooled. But many out there won't and will not admit to that because they believed the narrative, hook, line, and sinker. They believed what they were being fed on a daily basis. Why? Well, of course, because of the power of the media, the power of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. You're going to believe these things. You're going to believe the narrative. It's not surprising. But the sad fact of the matter is that most people don't want to do their own research and their own vetting and their own comparative studies. So they just feed upon the narrative. That's one of the things that's been driving me crazy this past several months. Because doing the homework, doing the research, that simply takes too much time. That simply takes too much work. And furthermore, we don't, and here's a big one, we don't want to question the narrative because it's easier to go along just to get along. But back in mid-March, what is that, like 2 months ago now? I did a broadcast on YouTube where I asked the question, rhetorically back then, and it was a sincere question back then. I asked the question, are we being manipulated? And I referenced a article by Dr. John Ioannidis, who's a professor of medicine and health research at Stanford University. And I want to revisit this article because this guy, Ioannidis, he was on the ball. He was rather prescient about a lot of things. Not because he's a prophet, but because he was really doing the homework as a scientist, as an epidemiologist. But he wrote an article which I referenced back in early March. The title of the article was "A Fiasco in the Making?" Question mark. A fiasco in the making? As the coronavirus pandemic takes hold, we are making decisions without reliable data. He wrote that back in early to mid-March. And he wrote back then, the data collected so far on how many people are infected and how the epidemic is evolving are utterly unreliable. Draconian countermeasures have been adopted in many countries. If the pandemic dissipates, either on its own, folks, and there is evidence that it is dissipating on its own. I'll get there later in this broadcast. But Ioannidis wrote back in March, if the pandemic dissipates either on its own or because of these measures that we're using, short-term extreme social distancing and lockdowns may be bearable. But how long, though, should measures like these be continued if the pandemic churns across the globe unabated? How can policymakers tell if they are doing more good than harm? Well, folks, he wrote that, like I said, over 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. And the data is now in. Loads of it. Data relating to all the different facets of this situation. And there's a lot of data now. As well as a lot of doctors, like John Ioannidis, who are clearly saying these lockdowns have done far more harm than good. A fiasco in the making was the question of Dr. Ioannidis. I believe this has become the greatest fiasco of all time. States that locked down early and aggressively. This is a fact. Listen to this carefully. States that locked down early and aggressively are no better off on average than states that didn't lock down at all. That's a fact. That is what the data is showing. Let me read to you a little bit from this week's, an article that appeared this week from The Federalist. I'm just going to cherry pick some paragraphs. I can't go through these articles in toto, of course. But listen to this from this week's Federalist. Quote, this particular article, by the way, was full of stats and facts, graphs, everything you need to know. And this was their conclusion from The Federalist. There appears to be no statistical connection between improved health outcomes and pandemic policies that forced nearly 40 million people into the unemployment lines. Folks, in other words, putting 40 million people out of work by shutting down, by locking down, there is no evidence that sequestering people worked. There is no evidence, no data, none, nada, zilch. There's no evidence that flattening the curve improved anybody's health outcomes, anybody individually or in whatever demographic group they're in. In other words, folks, and I know this is going to rock a lot of your boats, but this is, again, this is fact. This entire lockdown was useless. It was unnecessary. That is what the data is showing. Remember, these people said, follow the science. Follow the science. Well, we're going to follow the science now. There's a lot of it out there. This entire lockdown was useless. It's a fiasco. It's a fraud. The Federalist article goes on to say, after going through all of these stats, quote, There appears to be no statistical connection between the economic pain of the nationwide shutdowns and the number of COVID-19 cases or fatalities. Again, in other words, we'd have the same numbers of infected and the mortality rate, which I'm going to get to in a moment as well, because that's a lot lower than the WHO, a lot lower, humongously lower than what we were being told it was going to be 2 months ago. But we'd have the same numbers according to the conclusions of the data for the writers of this Federalist article. We'd have the same numbers whether we shut down or not. That is the data. That is not somebody's opinion. Let that sink in for a moment, folks. Because given all that we were told, that we had to lock down America to flatten the curve, we had to save lives, stay home, save lives. But what were the doctors saying? Well, let's do some comparative, something I've been trying to do for the last 3 months. Comparative studies. Question the narrative. You know, Dr. Fauci stated a few months back that what we are seeing with coronavirus was, quote unquote, unprecedented. But no, it's really not. At least not as far as the pathogen itself is concerned. And I've gone through that for several weeks now. We had the Spanish flu of 1918. Millions died. We had the Asian flu of 1957. 116,000 people died. We had the Hong Kong flu of 1969. 109,000 people died. They're telling us right now that we passed 100,000 in COVID. This isn't unprecedented. What is unprecedented is the response to the virus. The over-the-top fear-mongering of the virus. That's been unprecedented. The over-the-top politicization of the virus. That's been unprecedented. The over-the-top propagandizing of the virus. That's been over the top. That's been unprecedented. The draconian lockdown of the entire economy and of our society was indeed unprecedented. But the virus itself is not unprecedented. And the stats are now bearing that out. And they are confirming what many expert epidemiologists were saying back in early March. But those epidemiologists, they were ignored and dismissed because they didn't buy into the official narrative. Doctors like John Ioannidis of Stanford University, whose article I just referenced. Doctors like Knut Witkowski, the former head of biostatics epidemiology and research design at Rockefeller University, who YouTube a few weeks back removed a video of him talking about the virus that had racked up more than 1.5 million views, but YouTube took it down. Why? Because Witkowski is a critic of the official narrative to fight the coronavirus, and he has been derided. He has derided social distancing, saying it only prolongs the virus's existence. And he attacked the current lockdowns as mostly unnecessary. As Witkowski said in an interview over a month ago, quote, I love this quote. I've quoted this quote several times in the last month because it speaks volumes, my friends. Witkowski said, quote, I don't get paid by the government, so I get to do real science. Yes, indeed. And there have literally been hundreds and hundreds of doctors all across this country on the front lines of this pandemic who have decried and criticized the ludicrous societal and economic lockdown. But the media has shut them out and dismissed them because they dared to question the official narrative. Doctors, like I said, like John Ioannidis, Dr. Bhattacharya, again, another doctor who's put out a lot of studies. Dr. Bhattacharya did one of the largest serological studies a month ago. Dr. Scott W. Atlas. All of these guys are from Stanford University. I want to tell you something, folks. Stanford University, the fourth highest held esteemed medical university in the United States. But the powers that be were ignoring all of these doctors from Stanford University. because these guys were doing the real research, and that research was coming against the official narrative. So these guys from Stanford, they have been consistently the ones who have been right, my friends. Ioannidis, Bhattacharya, Dr. Scott Atlas. Then there was this guy who did an op-ed in the New York Post over a month ago. A doctor's name, Daniel Murphy, who was a New York emergency room doctor back in April. In his op-ed in the New York Post, he said this, quote, "Most of the patients he was seeing work in essential, low-paying jobs where social distancing isn't easy." He writes, "Nevertheless, the wave passed over us." Now remember, he wrote this back in mid-April. Excuse me. The wave passed over us, peaked, and subsided. And this is the takeaway. This is the pull quote from this Dr. Murphy over a month ago. "The way this transpired tells me the ebb and flow had more to do with the natural course of the outbreak than it did with the lockdown. Something I instinctively said." Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a science, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I instinctively said that is what would happen back in March. The natural course of the outbreak. Now, doctors are saying it. This New York doctor flatly stated in April that the numbers began to go down because of the natural course that a virus runs had nothing to do with the lockdown measures. And there is a report, my friends, that you probably haven't seen much of in the media, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But there is a report coming out of the UK that is pointing to the same conclusion. Coronavirus is dissipating. This whole idea of a lockdown has been out of sync with the realities of life. It's been a completely disproportional response to both common sense and all of the science and all the facts. We were asking a few months back, remember, we were asking this question, is the cure worse than the disease? The answer is now become much clearer. Just this past week, hundreds of doctors, listen up here, hundreds, not a dozen, hundreds, over 500, I think it was close to 600, doctors wrote a letter to President Trump just this past week, and they were asking him to end the coronavirus shutdown, saying the shutdown was a mass casualty incident. Not the virus, the shutdown. Because the shutdown was spurring deaths from other factors such as substance abuse and suicides. The doctors in this letter said that about 150,000 Americans each month that the shutdown remains in place. Now, let's bring this back to March. That would be almost 45,000 people now. Oh, I'm sorry, 450,000 people by now would have had new cancer detected, but they couldn't go to get tests because there was a lockdown and all the hospitals were only taking in COVID patients. Millions more were missing dental exams that could discover problems linked to heart disease, while others are experiencing domestic violence like child abuse. This is the medical collateral damage that the media doesn't seem to want to talk about. We haven't even touched on the economic side of this fiasco yet, my friends. Suicide hotline phone calls have increased 600%, these doctors said in this letter to the president. Dr. Simone Gold, an emergency medical specialist, authored the letter, which was signed, as I said, by more than 500 physicians. Are these doctors all quacks? Are these doctors all conspiracy theorists? Because that's what they're getting smeared as by the media. Any doctor who has spoken against the narrative the media has chalked up to being a quack has smeared them. But Dr. Gold, in a TV interview, stated that the doctors felt their knowledge and experience with patients is not being expressed to the public. Quote from Dr. Gold, we just want America to hear the story. We feel like there's one narrative out there. You think? But you need to hear the whole picture. You need to hear the rest of the story, Dr. Gold said. Let's go back to this, because in another report, see this letter they sent, they said the suicide hotline phone calls have increased 600%. And there was another report this week out of California. California doctors asking to end the lockdown because, according to this report, listen to this, folks, a year's worth of suicide attempts in the last 4 weeks. California doctor calls for end to lockdown. Let me repeat that. There has been a year's worth of suicide attempts in the last 4 weeks. The doctor in charge of a Bay Area, California trauma center said that California should end its lockdown orders after an unprecedented spike. There's something more that's unprecedented, Dr. Fauci. The unprecedented spike in suicide attempts during the coronavirus pandemic. Quote, we've never seen numbers like this in such a short period of time. Dr. Mike the Blasey Black. I can't say this guy's last name. What is it about doctors? I have all these names I can't pronounce. But anyway, this guy, Dr. Mike, head of the trauma at John Muir Medical Center, told the local ABC station, quote, I mean, we've seen a year's worth of suicide attempts in the last 4 weeks. He said, it's time to end the state shutdown. Now, he's speaking of California. I think originally this was put in place to flatten the curve and to make sure hospitals have the resources to take care of COVID patients, he explained. But now we have the current resources to do that. But our community health is suffering. And that's the point, folks. You see, 2.5, 3 months ago, they were telling us we have to lock down until we flatten the curve. We have to flatten the curve. We have to save our hospitals. We have to save the healthcare system. We can't reopen till we flatten the curve. That was the mantra 2.5 months ago. But then the goalposts were moved, and it went from flattening the curve to we can't open until we have massive testing. And then when they got the massive testing, they moved the goalpost again. We can't open until we have massive contact tracing. And once they got that going, they started saying, we can't open till we have a vaccine. They keep moving the goalposts, my friends. They're trying to convince people that flattening the curve was getting rid of the virus. They were trying to convince people that locking down was going to get rid of the virus. But locking down was never going to get rid of the virus. And no epidemiologist said it would. Because we were actually impeding the development of herd immunity, that natural development of our immune system to resist the virus. Locking down and isolating ourselves was never a sound policy, but the masses bought into it, hook, line, and sinker, because of the excellence in fear-mongering. But the medical experts at Stanford University from the get-go were adamantly decrying that policy. And as I said many times, they've been largely ignored because their findings didn't fit the narrative. Dr. Bhattacharya, who did one of the earliest and largest serology tests, said, quote, I think in the back of people's heads, there is this idea that somehow we can eradicate this disease if we just stay locked down. That's not possible. The serologic evidence tells us this. It tells us the epidemic is too widespread to eradicate. It spreads via asymptomatic contact, which is an important point, by the way. There are many people who don't have any symptoms, or they might have mild cold symptoms that can spread the thing. But they're not going to go for testing. They're not going to show up at the hospital for a doctor. And this is what that has been shown over these early months. We've got now reports because of the serological testing that coronavirus was probably in America as early as late November, early December. These are what the tests, this is what the data is showing. Folks, I know, and I got to get to a break. I know there are many of you who don't want to hear this. I know there are many who will utterly reject what I'm saying. But this is the conclusion based on the science. The response to this virus by our government has been nothing but a fiasco and a fraud perpetrated upon the American people. Probably the greatest fiasco in all time. But I'll be back with much more, folks. Stick around. It's time for a Selah moment. back. The Newsboys, Secret Kingdom. I really like these guys. All of their music is so good. But praise God for a little bit of a musical break, a little Selah moment. But welcome back. Andy White here. If you're just joining us, you are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Nepegue, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And I am here, as always, penetrating the unseen powers of darkness simply by speaking the light of truth, sending powers and principalities into frothy fits of frenzies. And probably a bunch of liberals, too, but I'll leave that right there. So getting back to my discussion here. So last weekend was Memorial Day weekend, as you all know. And had my mom over for the weekend, my 85-year-old mom. Just tried to get her out of her house. She's been cooped up for months. And, we had her over for the weekend, had a barbecue. Just me, my wife, and my mom. But on Monday, we were watching, I think it was Monday. I don't know if it was Monday or Sunday. I don't remember. I think it was Monday. We were watching. She wanted to watch Governor Cuomo's daily press briefing that he's been doing on the coronavirus response here in New York. I didn't really want to see it. I can't really stomach the things the guys do and are saying, but my mom wanted to see it. And then I almost fell out of my chair when I heard Governor Cuomo, and I heard it with my own two ears. Just the other day, this past Monday, Governor Andrew Cuomo admitted that the models were, quote, they were all wrong. They were all wrong. See, he was being pummeled for a change, because usually the media fawns over him, but he was being asked the serious questions about why he got this wrong and why he got that wrong. And he just, a little bit flummoxed said, well, the models, they were wrong. They were all wrong. But here's the problem, folks. All of their policies were based on the decisions of those models. Let me reference again from the article that John Ioannidis wrote back in early March, A Fiasco in the Making. Quote from that article. At a time when everyone needs better information, from disease modelers and governments to people quarantined or just social distancing, we lack reliable evidence on how many people have been infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, or who continue to become infected. Better information is needed to guide decisions and actions of monumental significance and to monitor their impact. Ioannidis went on to say in that article, this evidence fiasco, he called it an evidence fiasco 3 months ago. This evidence fiasco creates tremendous uncertainty about the risk of dying from COVID-19. Reported case fatality rates, like the official, now this was the number that the WHO was giving back in February and March. The official death rate, the official fatality rate, they were saying was 3.4%, and Dr. Ioannidis back then said that number is meaningless. But that number is what fueled the fear-mongering. Dr. Ioannidis, I'm telling you, he was prescient in what he was saying in this article back in March. But he was prescient not because he's a prophet, but because he was an honest broker with no agenda in regards to this virus. And as Cuomo and Fauci bemoan the fact, because Fauci has said it too, that the models they were relying on were all wrong. I'll say it again. They based their policy-making decisions on these models. But there was a whole other crop of experts, like those guys from Stanford University, that should have been heard, but they were dismissed and they were ignored. And let me remind you why they were dismissed. Because Fauci and company have an agenda, and they only use the models that they wanted to use that comported with that agenda. And if you think that is a conspiracy theory, then you simply haven't been paying attention to all the facts at hand. And by the way, I don't engage in conspiracy theories on Open Up the Doors. I'm giving you the facts and the history. But now, here we go. Just this past week, and this is important, folks. Just this past week, the CDC put out a report. They have confirmed what all those other doctors, like those Stanford doctors, who were being dismissed were saying, the CDC numbers now, what all those serology studies were saying, the CDC finally put out the numbers. But once again, you probably didn't hear about this in the media too much this week. But let me read from a report by Daniel Horowitz on the CDC study. Daniel wrote, the CDC just came out with the report, which I read, by the way, that should be earth-shattering to the narrative of the political class. Yet, it will go into the thick pile of vital data and information about the virus that is not getting out to the public. Consider this, my friends, right now, a public service announcement. For the first time, the CDC has attempted to offer a real estimate of the overall death rate for COVID-19. And under its most likely scenario, the number is 0.2%. Officials estimate a 0.4% fatality rate among those who are symptomatic and project a 35% rate of asymptomatic cases among those infected, which drops the overall infection fatality rate to just 0.26%. Almost exactly where the Stanford researchers pegged it over a month ago. Until now, we have been ridiculed for questioning the narrative. We have been ridiculed for saying that the death rate was actually pretty low, not the 3-4 point estimate of the World Health Organization, which drove the panic and the lockdowns. And now the CDC is agreeing to that much, much, much lower rate in plain ink. Ultimately, we might find out that the IFR, the infection fatality rate, is even lower because numerous studies and hard counts of confined populations have shown a much higher percentage of asymptomatic cases. That's a good thing. Asymptomatic cases means there's millions of people who have it and it doesn't affect them at all, just like so many other bacteria and viruses and pathogens. But simply adjusting for a 50% asymptomatic rate would drop the fatality rate to 0.2%, exactly the rate of fatality Dr. John Ioannidis of Stanford University projected almost 3 months ago. Nevertheless, my friends, these nattering nabobs of negativism, don't you just love that phrase? It's an old phrase back from the 70s. Those nattering nabobs of negativism, the media, want to keep this thing going for as long as they can. They want to keep the fraud going. They want to keep the fiasco going. Turn over to the Drudge Report on any given day, today, any day, and you will see, all you will see is more fear-mongering and panic peddling with new warnings of new outbreaks and the second wave that's coming, which even if it did, it would be nothing out of the ordinary anyway. The media, just this past week, man, they were all aghast. I couldn't believe it. Well, I could believe it, actually. But when they were just freaking out. And then the control freak governors picked up on what the media was showing with all these pictures and reports and videos of this past Memorial Day weekend, with all these crowds that were at the beaches and the parks and swimming in public pools. And you saw videos and pictures of all these hundreds and hundreds of people with no mask on, with no social distancing and frolicking in the water. And the media was aghast, and all the doomsayers in the media were out there saying, oh, there's going to be all these new outbreaks in the coming weeks. Oh, we're going to have a new outbreak in 2 weeks because of all these people. Folks, write this down, because I will test it in about 2 to 3 weeks. Because I will bet you dollars to donuts, a phrase my mother always used to say, I'll bet you dollars to donuts. I will bet you dollars to donuts that their prediction of a new outbreak in 2 weeks will not happen. I would be willing to bet that we won't see any major spikes at all coming off the Memorial Day weekend. I'll bet you. Now, could a few people here and there possibly get it? Well, maybe. But an outrageous spike, we'll know in about 2 weeks or so. Stay tuned. But in the meantime, In the meantime, here's some really good news. Bet you haven't heard much about this either. An Oxford University vaccine trial. This was a report out of the UK the other day. An Oxford University vaccine trial has only 50% chance of success. You know why? Because coronavirus is fading so rapidly in Britain. A project co-leader has warned. Professor Adrian Hill said an upcoming Oxford vaccine trial involving 10,000 volunteers threatened to return a, quote, no result because of low transmission of COVID-19 in the community. Folks, in other words, the virus is petering out. Isn't that good news? But it's not good news for the nattering nabobs of negativism. But the virus is petering out. It's running its natural course, like a lot of these doctors said would happen. It's dying off as we get into the warmer weather. Professor Hill said it is a race, talking about the creation of this vaccine. They're in a race with competition. But that's not what she's talking about. This quote is great. This vaccine, it's a race. But it's not a race against the other guys, the competitors. It's a race against the virus disappearing. And against time, the doctor said. At the moment, there's a 50% chance that we'll get no result at all. Hill said that of 10,000 people recruited to test the vaccine in the coming weeks, some of whom will be given a placebo, because that's how they do tests. Listen to this, out of 10,000 people. This is going to blow your mind. He expected fewer than 50 people to catch the virus. And if fewer than 20 test positive, then the results will be useless, he warned. We're in this bizarre position of wanting COVID to stay, at least for a little while, but the cases are declining. Yes, my friends, despite the continuing droning on of the media doomsayers, the coronavirus is disappearing. But what will remain is the remembrance of how easy it was to scare the population into servile domination. Because mark my words, the coronavirus will come and go, but the government will never forget how easy it was to take control of your life, to control every sporting event, classroom, restaurant table, church pew, and even if you were allowed to leave your own house, or even to have people over to your house. It's been a fraud, people. It's been an absolute fiasco. But I've got to take a break. Stick around. I'll be back with more. Here's Jason Upton with Freedom. Yes. Praise God that we have freedom in Jesus Christ. Liberty. It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Enjoy the music. I'll be back in a moment. Stick around. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Epic, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And thanks for joining in and tuning in, everybody, all across the fruited plain, all around the spherical globe. If you are just joining me now, late in the broadcast, you can still catch us over on Facebook Live, as well as on YouTube. I am broadcasting, live streaming on both platforms today. So whatever your preference is, and wherever you might be, please share this into your streams as well. Facebook, YouTube, please share and invite people over to Open Up the Doors. If you've never liked the page, please like the Open Up the Doors page. That's at facebook.com/faithfm91.7. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. Go on over to YouTube, look up Andy White, Open Up the Doors, and just hit that little subscription button. And right next to it, there's a little bell that will notify you when we upload the archives of these broadcasts. And there's all kinds of stuff there on my YouTube channel that you could share for your edification, for your encouragement, informationally wise, inspirationally wise. Please check out my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. I'd appreciate that so very, very much. I'm running out of time. I got so much I want to get to, But someone asked a really important question that I think I need to address in the Facebook stream about how do they know what the fatality rate is, that it's that low at 0.2% when they've been doctoring the numbers. Well, a couple of things. What's really important is the serology tests are the key. The more they do the serology studies, the more they do the testing, the more people they see are asymptomatic. In other words, they've gotten it. Millions of people have already had it, and they overcame it without knowing what it was. So they've got the antibodies. A lot of people, this thing just hit them like a cold, which means, and here's the thing, the more people who have had it, the more people who have overcome it, shows that the mortality rate is not the doomsday numbers that they were panic peddling, but exactly what the data is now showing and had been predicted, like I said, from those guys from Stanford University. The mortality rate on the whole right now is coming in at around 0.2%. For most people, the virus causes mild or moderate symptoms that clear up in a couple of weeks. Obviously, we know that older adults and people with existing health problems are at a higher risk of severe illness, and that is where most of the deaths are. Over 80, close to 85, 90% of the deaths are for people 75 and above and in nursing homes. I can't get into all of that right now, but we know that. But this is how they do these tests. But here's an interesting thing that just came out. I just read this last night. The CDC, these people are insane, my friends. And yes, it is a fiasco. And yes, there's a lot of fraud going on. And yes, there's a lot of manipulation of the numbers going on. And there's so many things that we can't trust. And this is comical. This is like the theater of the absurd. The CDC came out with the report just yesterday, which I read last night. And this is what they said. You can't trust all of these serological tests to make policy on. Why? Now, the CDC is saying you can't trust the serological tests now because they're saying the data is not reliable. What? It's totally amazing, folks. So now we're being told by these clowns that none of the models, the same clowns that told us that none of the models were right or reliable, that none of the data is reliable, these are the same clowns. Need I remind you of the fact that these are the same clowns, by the way, that have been warning us for years about global warming, all based on their models and their data. Hello. Now they're telling us, oh, you can't trust the data. You can't trust the models. This whole thing has been a theater of the absurd. You know, I haven't done a theater of the absurd update for quite some time. Perhaps it's time to pull it out of mothballs. Because this has really been a clown show in so many ways, my friends. But yes, my friends, when you hear the sound of the carnival carousel, when you hear the cranking of the melodious barrel organ, that can only mean one thing. It's time for a theater of the absurd news update. Real news stories that would make the Carnival Freak Show jealous with envy. So step right up and give an ear. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside. Come inside. Theater of the Absurd News Updates are brought to you by 8 Clowns in a Mini Cooper, LLC. All right, I haven't done that in a while. But the reason I kind of put the Theater of the Absurd into mothballs was because it's gotten to a point where everything is absurd. But I got a couple of things here I felt like I just had to do it. Because there's this one great example. We all know about all the crazy draconian lockdowns and tyrannical dictates that came out of Governor Whitmer over there, in the governor of Michigan. Here's a great story that came out over the Memorial Day weekend. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's husband, have you heard about this? This past Memorial Day weekend, he urged a marina, to get his boat in the water in time for Memorial Day weekend, according to social media posts that were posted by the marina. All the while, Governor Whitmer was publicly telling cooped-up residents in Michigan to resist flocking to the popular vacation areas during the coronavirus pandemic. She was telling them, don't go out on Memorial Day. Don't go out down to the water. But personal Facebook posts from North Shore dock owner Tad Doker are no longer available. But the Detroit News reported that Doker's staff last week took a call from Whitmer's husband, Dr. Mark Mallory. And the quote is this from the marina owner. "This morning I was out working when the office called me. There was a gentleman on hold who wanted his boat in the water before the weekend." Being Memorial Day weekend and the fact that we started working 3 weeks late means there's no chance this is going to happen. Well, our office personnel had explained this to the man on the phone, and the man on the phone replied, quote, "I am the husband of the governor. Will this make a difference?" Yeah, we're just better off. We're just better than everybody else. Do as I say, not as I do. And that's really what these elites think of you, my friends. Whitmer had urged the residents of Michigan not to flock to Traverse City, and yet what did her family try and do? They wanted to go boating in Traverse City. Whitmer had urged state residents not to flock to Traverse City. She said, quote, "A small spike put the hospital system in dire straits pretty quickly. That's precisely why we're asking everyone to continue doing their part. Don't descend on the waterfront in Traverse City from all regions of the state," as they were planning on doing that very thing. What? The hypocrisy is off the charts. Then there's another story. I got a couple of theater of the absurds here. Did you see the one about the MSNBC cameraman? I mean, folks, these people are such frauds. So Memorial Day weekend, MSNBC's out there. They got a reporter out in the field, and he's got a mask on. The reporter has a mask on camera. And he's doing a report how nobody is social distancing. This park is full of people. No one's wearing a mask. And he's talking loudly. He's doing this report for MSNBC. And he's mask shaming the people that are walking by. And all of a sudden this guy hears him. As the guy saying, "Look at these people. They're not wearing masks." And the guy on live TV said, "Neither is your camera crew." The guy got snagged big time. This passerby takes out his iPhone and starts filming the fact that the MSNBC camera crew didn't have masks on. Only the guy on camera who was mask shaming everybody. Folks, these people are such frauds. They're such frauds. It's unbelievable. Or maybe it really is believable, my friends. Maybe it just really is. You would think that they would be humiliated from all the ludicrous actions they've taken. But no, it'll be just the opposite. They will never admit to ever being wrong. They will rewrite the history and say that this fiasco produced good results. Then they will take a victory lap around the rubble heap of the destruction that they created in so many people's lives, with their arrogance and pride being fully on parade. Instead of being humbled by the fiasco they created, they will glory in it and perpetuate the fraud for as long as they can get away with it. They will justify their actions no matter what the facts show. And these people should be mocked and they should be ridiculed for the frauds they are. Of course, people won't do it. They won't be mocked. They won't be ridiculed because they're the elites. They're the smart. They're smarter than everybody else. They're the intellectuals of this world system. They're the wise of this world system. But you know what the scripture says? Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes. And I am quickly running out of time. How do I want to wrap this up today? As I've said so many times over the course of these last few months, when I asked it sincerely 3 months ago, are we being manipulated? 3 months later, I can assuredly say to you, the answer is a resounding yes. This coronavirus crisis has been a test run, my friends, at the very least, for those neo-globalists who seek a centralized and authoritarian state government. They want to prove to the masses that it's only a centralized, large government that can protect you and save you and provide for you. The message they want to send to you is, you need us. You need the government. You don't need your business. Oh, we'll provide for you. Don't worry about you're losing your business. Don't worry about losing your livelihood because we'll give you free money every month. Don't worry about it. It's all been a test run, my friends. But if you believe that you have individual liberty and freedom, if you believe that you are responsible for yourself apart from the government, then you are a threat to society. You are a threat to their narrative, and you either belong to the collective and fall in line, or you are the virus. You are the virus. There's so much more I wish I could cover today, my friends. But as always, I've got more content than I do time. It's now time to go. I can't believe it's 4 o'clock already. I'm out of time, folks. But watch. Stand fast in the faith. Be brave. Be strong. And in all that you do, let it be done with love, beloved. God bless. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors.